We're going to move now into the central theme of the book of Genesis. Chapters 1 through 11 have been basically preparatory, extremely concise, moving very rapidly to God dealing with all men through a nation. Now, he's been trying to deal with all men in different ways, and it hadn't really worked. Men, his hearts are wicked. So he's going to pick one family to bring the Messiah from that family. That's why Genesis 50 chapters, we get to Abraham in chapter 12, and he's the theme of the rest of the book. Now, I'm going to start back in chapter 11:24, because that's where the family of Terah is discussed, and of course, Terah is Abraham's father. Now, Nahor lived 29 years and became the father of Terah. Now, Terah, we think means spreading out, migrating. None of these names can be certain, but that's the most commonly held one. Now, obviously, Terah was a polytheist. We learn that from Joshua 24:2. However, in Genesis 31:53, it implied that he knew the Lord. And matter of fact, it's Terah that decides to move. It's Terah that leaves for Canaan. Some have said, well, God spoke to Terah first and Abraham, but Abraham was faithful and Terah wasn't. I don't think we can answer that question. We don't have all the information we would like. Terah was a polytheist as his fathers, but he did know the Lord. And obviously he didn't worship him with the wholeness of heart. Now, and Nahor lived 119 years after he became the father of Terah, and he had other sons and daughters, okay? And Terah lived 75 years and became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now, usually the oldest son is mentioned first. But we're going to do a problem of dating in chapter 11, verse 31. I'm going to hold off some of my comments there, but simply to say that Abram seems to be listed first, not because he was born first, because Haran seems to be the oldest. Nahor is going to marry one of his daughters, which implies he's older, and Abraham is not really born, if our figures are right, until Terah is 130, but he listed first because of preeminence. Now, Abraham means, there's two primary words, exalted and father. Some think it means exalted father. Some think it exalts his father. Some think the exalted one is his father. We're not sure. Now, the word Nahor, they think means panting, and the word Haran, some say means mountaineer, but we just can't be certain about that. Now, these are the records of the generation of Terah. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran became the father of Lot. Now, Haran is mentioned because Lot is the one that's going to go with the family when they leave Ur of the Chaldees. And Haran died in the presence of his father. Does that mean that he died when his father was present? Well, that's what it sounds like in English, but it's a Hebrew idiom to mean he died before his father. And this is the first example in the Genesis of a son that dies before the father. So it's recorded for that reason. And Terah died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his birth, Ur of the Chaldees. Now, Chaldees is a term that can mean a racial group or later on a group of wise men. Here, it's obviously looking back to a time because the Chaldeans were not in control of Ur at the time that Abraham lived. And so it's one of those that you can tell that whoever wrote this is looking back and putting some rather new terms into an old account. And nothing wrong with that. We do that. We call President Lincoln even before he was president, and we look back in history. And that's kind of what's happening here. And Abram and Nahor took wives for themselves. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai. Now, Sarai means either queen or princess. We think it's from a root that means to rule. And the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She's going to figure in prominently later. The daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah. And you see that Ishkah? Now, some have wondered what this lady is doing in this text. The rabbis say she's another name for Sarah. But that didn't seem to fit because this verse seems to imply that her father is a different one, is Nahor instead of Terah. So I'm not sure who she is. It is obvious that Sarai is Abraham's half-sister. We learned that from Genesis 20, verse 12. But exactly how that occurs, we're not certain. And we just can't be real dogmatic about this. Let's see. Okay. Notice in verse 30, Sarah's barren. It repeats it twice. She's barren. She has no child. And Terah took Abraham his son, and Lot the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went out together from Ur of the Chaldees in order to enter the land of Canaan. Now, did God speak to Terah as well as Abraham about go to a land that I'll show you? Well, we're not certain about that, but the fact the land of Canaan's mentioned is interesting because that's the destination they're going to be going to. Notice that Terah is the one who leads them out, not Abraham here apparently. Now, and the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now, notice they didn't make it all the way to Canaan. They went as far as Haran. There's been a lot of speculation of why they only went as far as Haran. Well, first of all, Ur and Haran are both centers of the worship of the moon god Zen. And some of the family names of Terah seem to imply that he was a worshiper of the moon goddess. And maybe that's why he went as far as other city. Now, when you look at this 205, the Samaritan Pentateuch has 145. Now, why would they have that? Well, the problem comes from comparing the dates here with the sermon of Stephen found in Acts chapter 6 and 7. Now, in Acts 6:10, Stephen says that Abraham left Haran after his father died. But if you add these dates up, if you compare 1126 and 1132, you get a discrepancy of 60 years. Now, the Samaritan Pentateuch reduces the number found in verse 32 to 145, and that would make it right. Others say that although Terah had children at 75 years old, it was not Abraham, but it was Haran that he had then. He didn't have Abraham till he was much older, 130 years. Now you see, they dealt with the 60 by adding it onto Terah's life. Samaritan Pentateuch takes it away. Other theories add it too. Now we can't be certain, but it's obvious here that we've got some kind of discrepancy between the account of Stephen and this account and what it seems to say. But I think there's ways to explain that. Now, if I come to chapter 12, the word, and now the Lord said to Abram. The word now and the word said are not in the Masoretic text. Because again of Acts chapter 7, let's see, verses 2 through 7, where Stephen says the call of God came to Abraham while he was still in Ur of the Chaldees. It seems that they're trying to add those to the Samaritan text, to the Masoretic text, to say that God spoke chapter 12 to Abraham while he was still in Ur. So what we have is a sequence here out of chronological order. And that's not unusual for Genesis, and I think that's probably accurate when you compare Stephen's account. Now, in Stephen's sermons, there are several discrepancies as far as our understanding of Old Testament history and Stephen's understanding. Maybe he was using rabbinical tradition, and so maybe it's just a miscalculation. I'm not sure here, but there are some problems in Stephen's sermon as far as the Old Testament goes. Now, the Lord, that's Yahweh, the covenant name for God. Notice God came first to Abraham, not because he deserved it, not because he's such a good guy, not because he wasn't, quote, a polytheist. We don't know what he was. God came to him in grace. Said to Abram, go forth. Now that sounds a little strong. The Hebrew is go for yourself, which implies there's something in it for you. It means follow me, but it's not as strong as go forth like an imperative. From your country, and from your relatives, and from your father's house. Because I want to tell you what, the greatest temptation Abraham had was the polytheism of his fathers and relatives. So he did leave. Now some say he should have left everybody there. He should have left his father Terah and his nephew Lot and all of them except Sarah. If he was supposed to and didn't, then he didn't fully obey God's command until a later time, many years later in Haran. Some say this did not include his immediate family, but simply the polytheistic context in which he grew up, and that's quite possible. So he's to leave there, which meant turning his back on the national gods that he had grown up with. For the deities were seen to be local in this era, and he was going to follow the God who had spoke to him, a new God. Now, notice what it says, to a land that I will show you. Now, we learned from chapter 11, verse 31, it's the land of Canaan. But whether for sure he knew where the land was, we're not certain. Now, the rabbis say there's a sevenfold promise here. First of all, be the father of a great nation. Second, he'll be blessed in his lifetime. Third, his name would be renowned. Fourth, he will be a blessing to others. 5, those who honor him will be blessed. 6, those who curse him will be rejected, or those who reject him will be cursed. And 7, he'll have universal influence. Now, I think that's probably true. So let's go back and see exactly what it means. That I will show you. You ought to see Hebrews 11:8, where this very same thing is spoken of as Abraham's faith in following God. And I will make your name great. and I will make you a great nation. There's two things caught up together. His fame is going to be in his descendants. Now, the idea of a great nation, that's pretty strong for a guy who has no children yet, isn't it? And so I think that's significant. And I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, implying in your lifetime, and I'll make your name great, meaning everybody will know you'll be a name of renown. People can be blessed through you. I think it's a reference to the coming Messiah. And so you shall be a blessing. Now, this is an imperative in the midst of a series of imperfects, which is a very strong statement. Now, this is the nephal verbal stem, which is usually translated passive, will be blessed in you. You might want to see Genesis 18:18, Genesis 28:14, Acts 3:25. If I can read my writing, Acts 3:25 and Acts 8:25 and Galatians 3:8. Passive, will be blessed. Now, some say because this is middle or reflexive in Hebrew possibility from Genesis 22:18 and 26:4, it may mean they'll bless themselves in you. Well, I don't see any distinction there, really. God's going to take the initiative and bless all the world through Abraham, the coming Messiah. But these people are going to bless themselves by responding to Abraham's knowledge of God and the coming of the Messiah through him. So I don't see a great difference there. And in you, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. Now, let me say to you, many have said we got to be pro-Israel or God's going to curse us. Friends, we are under grace now in the blood of Christ. This is not something to say you've got to be gung-ho Jewish or something wrong with you. Now, I want to say anti-Semitic attitudes are inappropriate in every age. We need to thank God for what God's done to the Jewish people. And I think He's still going to use them in the end time because His name's caught up in the promises He's made. But they are not right in whatever they do until they turn back to God. The modern Jewish state is not the end-time state because they have not repented and believed in the one whom they've pierced. The book of Zechariah. Now, notice where it says, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed. There's the universal understanding of something that's going to happen through Abraham. And, of course, those of us who are very messianic in our understanding see this as Jesus of Nazareth. Now, so Abraham went forth. Josephus says he left because he tried to convert the inhabitants there, and they wouldn't convert, and so he just left. Well, I don't know about Josephus. And went forth, the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot with him. Now, see, it says Abraham went forth here in verse 4, but it says Terah went forth back up in 11:31. Maybe both were involved some way. And the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Josephus says he had adopted Lot, so he would have some children, but we can't be certain of that. Okay? Now, Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Again, I think that his daddy either was alive and he left his daddy because his daddy was a confirmed idolater, or the numbers need to be worked on a little bit, and he left because his daddy had died. He paid the respects due in his culture to his dad. Which it is, I can't be certain. Now, that's where it says, by the way, Haran, if you look at the map, it's the northern part of the Tigris-Euphrates, and it's very close to the Hurrian society. We're going to find that some of the customs of the early Hebrews fit more in with the Hurrian society than it does with the Sumerian Babylonian. Maybe it's because of the years they spent in Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his nephew, and all their possessions which they had accumulated, and the persons which they had acquired at Haran. Now the rabbis say this name acquired means made. And they say Abraham made them magically to show the power of God. That seems a bit much to me. I really think what we probably have here is that he bought some servants at Haran. Notice God called and uses a rich man here. And I think that's the idea. Although it is an unusual way of putting acquired. It's not the usual way of saying you made a slave, meaning you bought a slave. But I think that's what it's referring to. Now, and Abram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem. Now notice in the maps in the back of your Bible, Shechem is a very holy site later on. It's between Mount Ebal and Mount Gezerim. It's a very significant place. Several things happen there. In Joshua 24 is where the great affirming of the covenant, the Levitical singers on both sides. We see that same thing in Deuteronomy 11, 29 and 30. Joshua 24 really is a reaffirmation of the covenant later on. In 1 Kings 12, we have another celebration or ceremony at this site. So you see the connection of a very holy place. The Oak of Moray. Now, oak is the Septuagint's translation. It's probably Tinabith or Tirabith, and that's more likely the tree it was. There were very many of them. Now, Moray means teacher. From Judges 9:37, it may be a Canaanite worship altar because trees were very sacred. They showed the presence of underground water, which was tremendously important to desert people. But we have a diviner's oak in Judges 9:37. If this was a Canaanite worship place, Abraham completely transformed it by his worship of Yahweh. Now the Canaanite was in the land. Even Ibn Ezra, a Jewish commentator, says this is a later addition. And of course the Canaanites weren't in the land at this time. They were much later when the problem of the Canaanites occurred. Again, it's reading a more recent history back into an ancient history, which I don't think means it's wrong. It's just giving us more information to help us understand. Now, the word Canaanite, by the way, is a collective term for all the inhabitants of the Promised Land. Sometimes it's listed 2, Canaanite and Perizzite. Most time there's 6 tribes. Sometimes 7, sometimes 10, most often 6. The other collective term that's used for all the peoples is the Amorite. We get that from Genesis 15:16. And the Lord appeared to Abram. Now God appears to him several times to initiate the covenant, to confirm the covenant. And so here's another account. To your descendants I will give this land, which implies it wasn't given to him, but to his seed. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Of course, this would be at the Oak of Moray in Shechem. And he proceeded from there to the mountain east of Bethel. Now Bethel, it's called Luz until the time of Jacob. So they're reading a more current name back into the account. We see that from Genesis 28:19. It was called Luz. Okay? Bethel, and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west, which means the house of God, and Ai, which means a heap of ruins, on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord, and he called on the name of the Lord. Now, back in Genesis chapter 4, verse 26, we have people were calling on God by his covenant name. But from Exodus 6:3, it's obvious they didn't know the full meaning of that name until the time of Moses. It's obvious Abraham was a worshipful person, and he was honoring God in the land that God promised to give him. And Abram journeyed on. Literally, he pulled up tents. That's a significant phrase for a nomadic tribesman. And we'll see chapter 11, verse 2, where it's used again. And continued toward the Negev, which means the south land. It's not a desert. It's an uninhabited pasture land with a sparse grass for nomadic herds. Now, there was a famine in the land. The word famine means empty stomach. I think it was a test of faith. I think Abraham failed most of these tests of faith. You say, well, boy, he's known as a great man of faith. The Bible doesn't present the men of faith as faultless. It presents them with feet of clay, and yet God is willing to work with feet of clay. Boy, I'm so thankful. God said, leave your relatives. Abraham took half his immediate family with him. And he said, follow me to a land I'll show you. Abraham stopped halfway. Now there's famine in the land. God promised to give him a great nation. God promised to give him this land. He knew he wasn't going to die. But when famine came, he took it in his own hands and went down to Egypt to get food instead of trusting God in the land that he promised him. Now, so Abram went down to Egypt. It's always is geological, topological, as well as significant. He's leaving God's promise. And journeyed there, for the famine was severe in the land. And it came about when he came near to Egypt that he said to Sarai his wife, see now, I know that you're a beautiful woman. Some said, how could she be a beautiful woman? She's over 65 years old. Well, they lived a lot longer than them. She was middle-aged. There's a significant number of very attractive middle-aged women. And there's some in our day. I'm amazed at how pretty Dinah Shore is at her age. And there are many like that. Sarah was one that had kept her physical beauty, maybe because she had no children. There were no stretch marks around. Maybe that was the deal. And it will come about when the Egyptians see you, they'll say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but let you live. What about God's promise, Abraham? Are they going to kill you before God fulfills his promise? Did Abraham think Lot would fulfill his promise? I don't know. But it shows lack of faith on the father of faith's part. And I'm so glad that's true, because I think God can work with me in my lack of faith, and in you with your lack of faith. Aren't we a strange mixture of faith and doubt always? Abraham certainly is. Please say that you're my sister. Now that was half true from chapter 20, verse 12. Exactly how that worked out, we're not sure. Now, we learned from Hurrian society that when a man married, he would also adopt the woman, making her his sister as well as his wife. That was a way of showing preeminence in some way in their culture. So this fits into Hurrian society. But here, he's not doing it to fit into Hurrian society. He's doing it because he's afraid of the Egyptians and his beautiful wife. Now, some have said, well, the Egyptians were dark, and any light-skinned woman they thought was attractive. Now, that may be true. But whatever the reason, he is going to put his life and pay for it by the price of his wife's honor. Well, so look what happens. So it may go well with me because of you, that I may live on account of you. And it came about when Abram came to Egypt. Now the rabbis say it's singular here because he had hidden Sarai in a basket. But the Egyptians, border patrol, checking for customs, found her and said, "Woo, look at this woman in this basket." Now I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what Rashi says. Now this same thing is repeated in chapter 20 and chapter 26, again in Abraham's life and again in his son's life. Some say it's one account recorded in three different ways. I think not. I think the propensity of the father's lack of faith is passed on to his son, and even Abraham doesn't learn from this when he's chided by the Egyptian Pharaoh. It was just a weakness he had. Now, how it fits into his day and how we may have judged him harshly, I have to wait till I see the old boy face to face. And if I'm wrong, I'll apologize. But I think he's just a little turkey, half faith and half doubt like the rest of us. Now, and it came about, the Egyptians saw the woman was very beautiful, and Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. Well, she was put into his harem. This is no minor thing. This is a full-blown sexual act here, repeated. Well, what's going to happen? Therefore, he treated Abram well for her sake. Doesn't say how long. But Abraham was not only letting his wife pay the price of his life, but he was getting financial gain from it. And they gave him. Now, really, the Hebrew he had. I don't think he got most of his riches from Pharaoh. I think he had most of his wealth. He took with him down there. So it shouldn't be he gave in New American Standard in verse 16, but he had. Sheep, oxen, donkey, male and female servants. Some say, well, why the servants mentioned between the cattle? Because in that day they were considered property. And the Lord struck Pharaoh and his house with great plagues. Now it says because of Sarai. The rabbi said it was something sexual where he couldn't make love to Sarah to protect her. Maybe so. Some say because of Sarah means by the word of Sarah. And Rashi says that she sicked the angel of the Lord on him. Well, I think she had a right. I'd been pretty mad if I was Sarah at this deal. Then Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you've done to me?" And boy, he kind of just escorts him out of town, chides him, and sends him on his way with an official escort. Abraham doesn't say a thing because he's done wrong. Now in chapter 13, we have them moving back to the promised land, going to the same sites. Didn't go back to Shechem all the way, but we're passing on through. And there became some, notice in verse 7 it says, the Canaanite and the Perizzite were in the land. A few lessons ago, I gave you all the listing where the different tribes were mentioned that possessed Palestine. Here is the only place that mentions these two, Canaanite and Perizzite. Some say Perizzite means those who lived in unwalled villages, and Canaanite, those who lived in walled villages. That's quite possible, and it may be true here. They began to have fights. Wasn't enough pasture land for both Lot and his herds and Abraham and his herds. So what he did, he lifted his eyes and said, look, we got to make a decision. We can't have our kinsmen fighting in the presence of these lost tribes. They'll attack us. They see us fighting each other. So the older man said to the younger, you pick. Now the younger guy should have said, oh no, you're the older, you pick. But the younger guy apparently has a propensity toward material things. Lot in Hebrew is said to be a faithful man, a righteous man. But in reality, he had feet mixed with clay just like Abram. Now Abram shows great faith here and respect in letting Lot pick. But I tell you what, Abraham did not want the Jordan Valley where Lot picked. Some say he picked because it looked so good and well watered. That may be true. But Abraham didn't show any interest in that. Abraham didn't want that. He went on the other side of the Jordan, so I don't see any real distinction here of Lot taking something Abram wanted. But there was some wickedness there in Sodom and Gomorrah, and apparently Lot knew it, but it didn't make any difference. He wanted it. Look at verse 10, like a garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. Well, the rabbis say that means the garden of the Lord had a lot of trees in it, and like Egypt meant it had a lot of vegetables. Well, that's true. I don't know. But Lot liked it, and he picked that because of his eyes. By the way, the wickedness of this folks didn't bother Lot. At first, I bet he was just going to live close to him. But soon we find him living in the major center of wickedness himself. That's a good word. You may try to change your friends, but quite often your friends will change you. And that's what happens to poor old Lot. Now notice in verse 14, God comes again and talks to him about this land. For all the land which you see I will give to you and your descendants forever. Verse 15. Well, this is the Hebrew word, olam. Now olam, if you'll get your concordance, must be interpreted in light of the context. It means a long period of time. It does not mean what our English word forever does. For as you know, God took them out of the land several times for their unbelief. And So it's not forever, or God's Word's not true. You say, well, God's Word's conditional. Well, that's certainly true. Every promise God ever made, He made conditional on a generation's response in faith and repentance. And that's very true. But again, the Hebrew word is the only criteria here, not our systematic theology based on other parts of the Bible. And the Hebrew word olam means a long period of indefinite time that can move into eternity depending on its context. Now, he's told to get up and walk around and look what he's got as far as his land. His descendants will be as the dust of the earth. Wow. Wow. Here's a man with no children. He's getting up there in age, and God says, you're going to have descendants like the dust of the earth. What a promise of faith. And Abraham believes it. And that's what Paul says in Romans chapter 4, is when God imputed to him righteousness because he took God at His word. You say, yeah, but he sure fouled up. He tried to adopt Lot. He tried to take Hagar. He tried to do all this. Yeah, I know it. Friend, it's a strange mixture of faith and doubt like all of us. But Abraham believed God. He tried to help God, which sure made a mess of things, but he believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Look at Romans chapter 4. Now, by the way, people say, well, he's 100 years old. It's past having age. Remember, his father was 130 when he had Abraham, so it wasn't unusual to have children after around 100. It was the fact that Sarah was barren was the problem, not that Abraham was so old. Right? I guess in our day, it'd be like a middle-aged woman maybe just going into menopause having a child. Unusual, but not unheard of. So here we have faith and doubt mixed all in with the covenant promise of God who's going to fulfill it. Hallelujah. The Messiah is going to come from Him. And that's the essence of this. But it comes through a Jewish nation, through the Jewish law. Boy, I'm sure glad Abraham believed God. I've enjoyed being with you. I'll see you again, same time, same place, next week.